My mom said you can do fine without us, but your brother needs a softer touch. So I replied, you just need an excuse to kick me out and give him the house. Months later, he was begging to escape the property they gave him. When I turned 18, the locks on my childhood home were quite literally changed. I didn't leave because I had some grand romanticized dream of independence, and I didn't leave because I was rebellious. I left because my parents sat me down at the kitchen table 3 days after my high school graduation and made it abundantly clear that my time under their roof had expired. They told me it was time to learn how the brutal world works. They said I needed to man up, build character, and make it on my own 2 feet. Those were their exact words, delivered with the kind of cold, clinical detachment you'd expect from a middle manager laying off a seasonal employee. I didn't argue. I didn't scream or cry. I just walked upstairs, packed whatever I could fit into 2 duffel bags and a trash bag, and loaded it into a violently vibrating beat-up Honda Civic I had bought with the money I made scrubbing grease traps at a local diner. There was no graduation party. There was no teary goodbye at the front door. There were no offers of financial support or even a hot meal for the road. There was just the heavy, definitive thud of the front door closing behind me, sealing me out of their lives. My brother Leo, who is 4 years younger than me, had a drastically different existence. He wasn't just the golden boy. He was the absolute center of their universe from the moment he took his first breath. He was athletic, effortlessly charming, and possessed this uncanny ability to always be the victim or the hero. Depending on what the situation required, he could do absolutely no wrong in their eyes. If I came home 15 minutes late from a grueling double shift at the diner, I was lectured for an hour about being irresponsible and disrespectful of their sleep schedules. If Leo missed his curfew by 4 hours, it was because he lost track of time being a teenager and needed his rest. If I brought home a B+ on a calculus exam, they interrogated me about why I wasn't applying myself. When Leo brought home a C in basic algebra, they laughed it off, patted his shoulder, and said, "Not everyone is a numbers guy, buddy. You get the picture." He wasn't just the favorite. He was the only child they actually invested any resources in. He got brand new name brand clothes every season. He was gifted a pristine midnight blue sedan for his 16th birthday. He had expensive private tutors, elite summer sports camps, and a credit card for emergencies that he used for video games. Meanwhile, I bought my first refurbished laptop by saving my diner tips for 5 agonizing months, skipping lunches just to afford the tax. For a very long time, I convinced myself that none of it mattered. I built a psychological wall telling myself that this was just how the world worked. I thought maybe it was just easier for them to relate to Leo. Maybe I was too quiet, too intense, too different from their country club aesthetic, and that was entirely my fault. Instead of wallowing, I focused every ounce of my energy on building a life for myself. I worked agonizingly long hours. I took night classes at the community college, sleeping in my car between shifts to save on gas money. I lived off instant ramen and discounted bread. When I was 22, I took a massive risk and started a small real estate investment business with a guy I met in a business ethics class, David. Things improved, but it was a glacial, brutal crawl. We flipped a dilapidated duplex, doing all the drywall and plumbing ourselves to save cash. By the time I was 27, we had a legitimate company with 5 full-time employees. By 29, I was doing well enough to invest heavily in commercial real estate across the greater Chicago suburbs. I was wealthy, truly wealthy, but none of this was ever shared with my family. Not out of spite, but because they quite literally never asked. Our communication was limited to the most superficial, barren interactions imaginable. A generic happy birthday text, a forwarded holiday meme. I stayed cordial, but incredibly distant. I wasn't bitter anymore. I was just completely done trying to bleed water from a stone. The turning point, the moment the fragile piece shattered, came about 8 months ago. I got a phone call from my grandmother, Nana Rose. She is one of the only people in my entire bloodline who has ever shown me unconditional warmth. She called to tell me that Leo was getting married to his longtime girlfriend, Qley. It was going to be a massive, opulent event, a 5-star venue, a 5-course plated dinner, custom floral arches, a string quartet, something straight out of a bridal magazine. I didn't say much at first, just offering polite congratulations, but then I noticed a strange hesitation in her voice. "Nana," I asked, "what exactly is the wedding?" There was a long, agonizing pause on the line. The silence stretched so far I could hear the static. Then she said, her voice trembling slightly, "Oh, Marcus, I assumed they told you. It's on September 14th. The invitations went out a month ago." I hadn't received one. "Maybe yours got lost in the mail," she added quickly, her voice pitching up in that specific way people do when they are lying to protect your feelings. "You know how terrible the postal service is these days?" I could hear the immense strain in her voice, the desperate way she was trying to make excuses for a cruelty she fundamentally disagreed with. I knew right then with absolute crystal clarity that it wasn't lost in the mail. I simply wasn't on the list. Not even a courtesy back row invitation. I didn't make a scene. I thanked her for letting me know, told her I loved her, and hung up the phone. The very next day, Nana Rose called me back, and this time, There was cold steel in her voice. "Marcus, I spoke to your mother," she said, clipping her words, "and I told her that if my eldest grandson is not invited to this wedding, then your grandfather and I will not be attending. We are not going to stand around in expensive clothes drinking champagne and pretending this family is whole when they keep deliberately cutting you out." That meant the absolute world to me. Nana Rose wasn't someone who liked to stir the pot, but she possessed a fierce moral compass. Sure enough, 4 days later, I received a last-minute invitation in the mail. It was one of those generic mass-produced spares with the pre-printed names and a cheap gold foil border. There was no handwritten note. There was no phone call apologizing for the delay. It was just a single piece of cardstock shoved into a flimsy white envelope purely to check off a box and appease the matriarch. I almost threw it in the trash. I almost didn't go. But something dark and heavy gnawed at the back of my mind. It wasn't just the lack of an invitation. It was the deeper, sickening truth that after all these years, after I had built an empire from the dirt up without a single dime of their help, I was still the designated outsider. I was the dark stain they wanted to hide from their perfect, curated family portrait. Then I got another phone call, this time from a gossipy cousin who was helping coordinate the floral arrangements. She was on speakerphone chatting casually about the wedding logistics when she dropped a bomb that made the blood freeze in my veins. "Can you believe Leo and Qley are getting the house?" She laughed, "like the actual house, your parents' house." "Wait, what?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. "Yeah," she chirped, completely oblivious to my shock. "Your mom said they're handing over the deed as the ultimate wedding gift." Isn't that just wild? I mean, they could have easily sold that place for like $650,000 in this market, but they said they want to keep the legacy in the family. So sweet, right? I didn't say a single word. I let her ramble on for another 2 minutes before quietly hanging up. I sat in my home office staring blankly at the Chicago skyline out my window, piecing the grotesque puzzle together. They didn't just kick me out to the curb at 18 to build character. They kicked me out so they could preserve the house, the assets, and the legacy entirely for the golden child. The same house I was banned from returning to. The same house I once had to sneak into just to retrieve my own childhood photo album, only to be screamed at by my father for trespassing. That house had been violently erased from my life, and now it was being wrapped in a neat little bow for Leo. I didn't sleep a single second that night. I wasn't pacing the room in a blind rage. It was a quiet, cold, burning clarity. All the childhood slights, all the subtle humiliations, all the times I was told I wasn't enough. It wasn't a series of accidents. It was a deliberate, calculated pattern of erasure. So, I made a choice. I decided I would attend the wedding, not to support Leo, not to appease my parents. I went because I was about to start a war, and I wanted to look my enemies in the eye before I made my first move. Update 1. When I finally walked into that 5-star, impossibly arrogant country club venue, wearing a tailored charcoal gray Tom Ford suit, a lot of heads turned. My cousin gave me a confused, tight smile. Nana Rose looked immensely relieved, clutching her purse. My mother spotted me from across the room, standing near a towering ice sculpture. She excused herself from her wealthy friends, marched over to me, tilted her head and forced a smile so agonizingly tight it looked like her cheekbones might snap. She leaned in the smell of her expensive perfume, overwhelming my senses, and whispered in the softest, most venomous tone imaginable. "Marcus, I'm so glad you could make it. Just try not to embarrass us today, okay?" I almost laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it was so painfully, tragically predictable. That single sentence encapsulated her entire existence. Artificial politeness, masking a ruthless desire for control. I just smiled back, a dead, empty smile. I didn't say a word, but inside my chest something permanently fractured. I wasn't angry in a loud, explosive way. I was angry in a surgical, terrifying way. The venue was nauseatingly lavish. White marble floors, gold-accented chandeliers, people walking around with crystal champagne flutes posing in front of floral walls that cost more than my first 3 cars combined. Leo stood across the room in his custom tuxedo, laughing loudly with his groomsmen. His bride Qley was posing for photographers, flashing a brilliant, practiced smile. She was undeniably beautiful, but she had the exact same performative, hollow energy as my mother. I sat at a back table with distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in a decade. I kept my mouth shut and observed. After the vows, the dinner flowed into the speeches. My father stood up, clinked his glass, and delivered a speech that made my stomach physically turn. To my son Leo, my father boomed into the microphone, his eyes shining with genuine tears. "The only man who has made me proud every single step of the way. You are my legacy. The only man who has made me proud." As if I had never existed. As if I hadn't been born first. There was warm applause. I just stared at my plate, tracing the rim with my fork. Then came the grand finale, the announcement. "The boss is a." Leo took the microphone, dramatically wiping a tear from his eye. "I cannot thank my parents enough for everything they've given me." He choked out, including, "Well, it feels surreal to say this. Gifting Qley and me the house I grew up in. Our forever home. Gifting Qley our forever home." The room erupted into gasps, cheers, and thunderous applause. Guests turned to my parents, who were glowing like literal royalty, soaking in the admiration of their peers. I didn't clap. I didn't blink. I just listened to the sound of the final door being slammed in my face. I got up and walked outside into the cool night air, pacing the stone pathways of the country club garden. I needed oxygen. A few minutes later, I heard the distinct click-clack of my mother's heels behind me. "Marcus," she said, placing a delicate hand on my arm. "You seemed off during the speeches. Are you pouting?" I turned slowly to face her. "You didn't tell me about the house," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. She rolled her eyes, instantly exasperated. "Oh, please. This isn't about you, Marcus. Don't make Leo's day about you. We weren't sure how you'd react, and frankly, we didn't want the drama. You gave him the house," I stated flatly. "The same house you kicked me out of at 18 with a garbage bag full of clothes. Do you really not see the hypocrisy in that?" Her smile turned razor thin. "We didn't kick you out. You were a man. It was time for you to stand on your own 2 feet and build character. I was 18. Leo was 27. Why didn't he have to stand on his own 2 feet?" She tilted her head, looking at me like I was a slow, confused child. "Because Leo is different, Marcus. He's always needed a softer touch. And more importantly, he gave us a life to be proud of. You made your choices. You left. You should be happy for your brother." "I left because you changed the locks," I whispered. Then a question clawed its way out of my throat. One I hadn't meant to ask. "Why didn't you ever visit me in 13 years? Not one birthday? Not one dinner? Why?" She looked highly uncomfortable, glancing around to ensure no one was eavesdropping. "We were busy. Life gets complicated. You were always so independent. We figured you didn't need us. You didn't want to see me succeed without you," I corrected her quietly. "You needed me to fail to justify throwing me away." Her face hardened into stone. "That is quite enough. You don't get to come here and lecture me. You are my son, and you will show respect." "I'm not your son," I replied, stepping back into the shadows. "I'm just a ghost you invited to keep Nana Rose quiet. But you need to remember something, Mom. You raised 2 kids. You handed the world to one, and you threw the other in the dirt. You severely underestimated what I can do with dirt." She scoffed, turned on her heel, and marched back inside. I didn't follow her. I walked straight to my car, drove back to my penthouse downtown, and pulled out a manila folder I had been compiling for 6 months. See, I didn't just come to the wedding to mope. I came knowing exactly what I was going to do. The house that they had just gifted Leo bordered a very strange, overgrown half-acre parcel of land in the back. It used to belong to an elderly man named Mr. Henderson. It had sat untouched since the late 1980s. A few months ago, Mr. Henderson passed away and his kids listed the parcel quietly because I run a massive real estate firm. I saw the listing the minute it hit the private MLS. I bought it through a shell company for entirely in cash. Nobody knew, but a half-acre in the backyard wasn't enough. Over the next few weeks, I established a new development LLC. I hired a ruthless avant-garde architectural firm and gave them a simple directive. I want to build a commercial event venue. Make it 3 stories high. Make it entirely out of black steel and floor-to-ceiling glass. I want rooftop terraces, massive floodlights, and I want you to push the 0 lot line set back to the absolute legal millimeter right up against my brother's backyard. I also attended a dozen mind-numbing city council meetings. I discovered that the neighborhood's homeowners association had legally dissolved in 2011 after a bankruptcy scandal and was never reinstated. There were 0 architectural restrictions. The zoning was mixed-use commercial residential. It was a legal playground. I partnered with a high-end event coordinator named Sylvia. We created a brand for the venue called The Glass House. We built a massive Instagram following before we even broke ground, marketing it as the ultimate luxury micro-wedding and late-night wine bar destination. When the surveyors finally showed up in the backyard with their neon flags and heavy machinery, Leo absolutely lost his mind. I got the phone call on a Tuesday. He didn't even say hello. "Are you the one building the apocalyptic nightmare behind my house?" he screamed into the receiver. "I am the developer of the glass house." "Yes," I replied smoothly, sipping my coffee. "You can't do this. This is a quiet residential street. You're putting a 3-story wine bar in my backyard. I'm calling the city. I'm calling a lawyer. Go right ahead, Leo." I laughed. "It's all fully permitted. Mixed zoning, no HOA. We pour the concrete foundation next week. The rooftop lights are going to be spectacular. They might shine directly into your master bedroom, though. You should probably invest in some blackout curtains." He hung up, hyperventilating. 2 days later, my father summoned me to a high-end steakhouse. He tried to play the intimidation game, staring me down over a glass of scotch. "You are making a massive scene. Marcus, you're trying to ruin your brother's life out of sheer jealousy. I'm telling you to stop the construction." "I don't take orders from you," I said, cutting my steak. "I am building a multi-million-dollar asset. It's strictly business." "This is our legacy," he hissed, slamming his fist on the table. "No," I corrected him, looking him dead in the eyes. "It's Leo's legacy. You made sure of that 13 years ago. Now I'm building mine. Enjoy your lunch. I've already paid the bill." I walked out, leaving him speechless. But I wasn't even close to finished, because the real checkmate was sitting in a safety deposit box waiting for me to turn the key. Update 2. Let me tell you about Nana Rose's secret. The morning after the wedding, before the construction even started, Nana Rose had asked me to come over for tea. When I arrived, she handed me a small faded envelope. Inside was a heavy brass key and a handwritten letter. The letter read, Marcus, I always saw how they treated you. I always knew it was wrong. When you were a baby, I set up a safety deposit box for you. I was going to give it to you when you turned 18, but when your parents threw you out, I was terrified they would manipulate you into giving the assets to Leo. I kept it hidden. Use this when you are ready to secure your future. I love you. I drove to the regional bank 3 towns over, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The bank manager escorted me to the vault. Inside the metal box, I found $50,000 in matured government bonds. But underneath the cash was a thick manila envelope labeled Deed Parcel B. I took the documents straight to the county clerk's office. And when I saw the topological map, I actually had to sit down because I was laughing so hard I couldn't breathe. My grandmother hadn't just saved money. Decades ago, she had quietly purchased a bizarre 15-foot wide strip of land that ran the entire length of the right side of my childhood home. It was legally separate, zoned individually, and technically belonged entirely to me. So let's review the chessboard. I own the massive half-acre lot directly behind Leo's house, where I was building the 3-story glass venue. And now, thanks to Nana Rose, I also owned the entire right flank of his property. Leo's $650,000 forever home wasn't just boxed in, it was under siege. Step 1, the fences. I filed permits to erect commercial-grade privacy fencing on both of my lots. I didn't install normal wooden fences. I installed 14-high, completely opaque, brutalist black steel panels. I boxed Leo and Qley into a literal canyon. It blocked out 70% of their natural sunlight. Qley posted a crying video on her Instagram story about how her heritage garden aesthetic was ruined by spiteful corporate greed. I responded by angling the top panels of the fence so that the morning sun reflected blindingly straight into their kitchen windows. Step 2, the noise. Construction on the glass house began in earnest. We had excavators, cranes, and jackhammers running from exactly 7:10 a.m. to 5:59 p.m. 6 days a week. The noise ordinance allowed it, and I made absolutely certain my crews followed every single law to the letter so the city couldn't intervene. Leo called the cops a dozen times. The cops showed up, checked our permits, shrugged at Leo, and drove away. Step 3, the mail. Since Parcel B was technically its own lot, I registered a new address for it. It was identical to Leo's address, just 1 digit off. I started routing massive amounts of junk mail, concrete samples, and industrial catalogs to my lot. The mail carrier constantly got confused and stuffed Leo's pristine mailbox with 40 palms of commercial garbage every week. 6 months later, the glass house officially opened. I hosted a massive catered VIP launch party. I invited the mayor, local influencers, and Nana Rose. I did not invite my parents or Leo, but as I stood on the 3rd floor glass balcony holding a glass of scotch, I looked down into the canyon I had built. Leo and Qley were standing on their back patio, bathed in the neon purple glow of my venue's exterior lighting, listening to the muffled thumping bass of my string quartet turned DJ. They looked absolutely miserable. The fallout was catastrophic for them. The venue was a massive hit. We were booked out for weddings 2 years in advance, but living next to a 3-story neon-lit high-traffic commercial event space completely annihilated the property value of Leo's house. Qley couldn't handle the noise, the lights, or the absolute humiliation of living in a shadowed pit. She demanded they move. They listed the house for $650,000. It sat on the market for 3 months with 0 offers. Every potential buyer took one look at the towering black fences and the commercial venue looming over the yard and walked away. They dropped the price to $550,000. Nothing. They dropped it to $480,000. Still nothing. They were bleeding money, desperate to escape the nightmare I had meticulously constructed around them. Finally, after 7 agonizing months on the market, they received a lowball all-cash offer for $350,000. They were so desperate, so broken, that they accepted it immediately just to be free of it. They signed the closing paperwork without ever realizing that the buyer, a shell company named Rosewood Holdings LLC, was owned entirely by me. I bought my childhood home back for nearly half of its original value using the profits from the venue I built in its backyard. When the final deed transferred, I drove to the house. I walked through the front door, staring at the walls that used to feel like a prison. I didn't feel triumphant or gleeful. I just felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The ghosts were gone. I didn't tear the house down. Instead, I poured another $100,000 into renovating it. I tore out the pristine kitchen, knocked down the walls, and transformed the entire property into a transitional community center for teenagers aging out of the foster care system. I provided free housing, financial literacy workshops, and college prep tutoring. I named it the Rosewood Center after my grandmother. The day we hung the massive banner across the front porch, my mother drove by in her Mercedes. She slowed down, rolling her window down to stare at the sign. I was standing on the lawn holding a clipboard. We locked eyes for a long, heavy moment. She looked visibly aged. The arrogant, pristine facade she had worn at the wedding was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, sunken realization of what she had lost. She didn't say a word. She just rolled up her window and drove away. A week later, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. No return address, just a single piece of paper inside. Marcus. I didn't realize the magnitude of what we had thrown away until I saw your name on that deed. We were wrong. I hope you find peace. I folded the letter, walked into my office, and dropped it into the paper shredder. Then I went back to work. They spent their entire lives trying to bury me in the silence. So I built an empire loud enough to shatter their world, and I made them pay for the privilege of listening to it. Top comments. User 1. This is without a doubt the most meticulously executed, legally flawless, surgically precise revenge I have ever read on this platform. You didn't just beat them at their own game. You bought the board, changed the rules, and forced them to sell you their pieces for pennies. The fact that Nana Rose was the one holding the ultimate trump card, Parcel B, for decades is poetic cinema. She knew exactly what kind of monsters your parents were. Good on you for turning that house of trauma into a sanctuary for foster kids. User 2. The absolute audacity of your mother telling you to try not to embarrass us while they were literally in the middle of handing your childhood home to your brother. The entitlement is sickening. I can only imagine Leo's face when he realized his $650,000 aesthetic dream home was permanently trapped between 14T black steel fences and a neon wine bar. You played the long game perfectly. Did Leo or Qley ever try to reach out after they realized you were the one who bought the house back? User 3. As someone who works in commercial real estate and zoning, I am salivating over this. Finding a dissolved HOA and mixed-use zoning right next to a residential property is like finding a unicorn. You exploited every single legal loophole with absolute precision. The angled fence panels reflecting the sun into their kitchen is the level of petty I aspire to achieve in my life. Also, shredding your mom's pathetic apology letter was the ultimate power move. She only apologized because you proved you were more powerful than her golden child. Stay winning, Marcus.